The golden hues of the setting sun bathed the towering skyline of Dubai, casting elongated shadows over the palatial estate of the Al Fayed family. Inside the grand hall, adorned with intricate gold-trimmed arches and a chandelier that sparkled like a constellation, guests dressed in their finest attire gathered for yet another opulent affair hosted by Sheikh Omar Al Fayed. Khalid Al Fayed stood near one of the floor-to-ceiling windows, a crystal glass of untouched champagne in his hand. From where he stood, he could see the vast desert stretching beyond the city's glimmering lights, an endless expanse of golden dunes that seemed to call to him, an invitation to something freer, wilder, unchained. But he was anything but free. "Khalid," came a familiar, authoritative voice from behind him. He turned to see his father, Sheikh Omar, approaching with measured, deliberate steps. A powerful figure draped in a finely woven bisht, the Sheikh carried the weight of tradition in every movement. "You seem distracted," his father noted, eyes sharp. Assessing Khalid offered a polite smile. Just admiring the view. The future is not in the horizon, my son," Omar said. "It is here, among us, in our bloodline, in our duty." He gestured toward the center of the hall, where a group of esteemed guests conversed. Among them was a young woman dressed in an elegant emerald gown, her posture perfect, her smile measured, a woman whose presence had been carefully planned. "Amira al-Rahman," Omar continued, "daughter of Sheikh Hassan. She has been raised with dignity, with tradition, a suitable match." Khalid felt a familiar tightening in his chest. "I trust you will make an effort to know her," his father added. It was not a request. "Of course, father," Khalid replied, though his voice lacked conviction. As Omar departed to greet another guest, Khalid exhaled slowly. The expectations had always been clear: marry within their rank, uphold the legacy, continue the cycle. His entire life had been orchestrated, each decision calculated by someone else. A waiter passed by, offering more champagne. Khalid shook his head and turned toward the terrace. He needed air. Stepping outside, he found solace in the quiet night, away from the chatter of obligations. That was when he saw her. A woman stood near the balustrade, the breeze catching the loose strands of her auburn hair. She was looking up at the sky, seemingly lost in thought. She wasn't adorned in the heavy jewels or traditional attire of the women inside. Her dress was simple yet elegant, a deep navy that complemented the midnight sky. Something about her struck him. Perhaps it was the ease in her posture, the way she stood alone without needing the validation of those around her. She turned slightly, catching sight of him. A slow, knowing smile spread across her lips. "Not a fan of the crowd either, I see," she said. Khalid hesitated before responding. "It's more a fan of quiet moments." She tilted her head. "And yet, you belong to one of the most talked about families in Dubai. Quite the contradiction, don't you think?" He studied her, intrigued. "You know who I am?" "Of course," she extended a hand. "Layla Morgan, journalist." His fingers barely brushed hers before he withdrew. "A journalist? Dangerous." She caught the hesitancy in his expression and smirked. "Relax, I'm not here to dig up scandals, just covering the event." "Is that what you do?" he asked. "Write about people like me." "I write about people who interest me," she corrected. "And so far, you're more interesting than most of the men inside." Khalid couldn't help but smile at her boldness. It had been a long time since someone had spoken to him without an agenda. "Well then," he said, "I hope I don't disappoint." Layla's gaze held his. "And I have a feeling you won't." For the first time that night, Khalid felt something stir within him, something unexpected, something dangerous. A premonition that this woman, this moment, would change everything. The city of Dubai shimmered behind them, a sea of lights stretching toward the horizon. But Khalid found himself captivated by something far more intriguing: Layla Morgan. She leaned against the marble balustrade, the desert wind playing with the loose strands of her hair. Unlike the other guests inside, who spoke in hushed voices of business and alliances, she seemed at ease, unaffected by the weight of expectations that filled the grand hall. "And what does the great Khalid Al-Fayyad do for fun?" she asked, amusement dancing in her eyes. Khalid smirked. "You assume I have time for such luxuries." Layla arched an eyebrow. "Oh, come on. You must do something beyond wearing tailored suits and attending lavish parties. According to my father, my role is to uphold the family name, expand our empire, and secure beneficial alliances." Layla let out a soft laugh. "Sounds thrilling," Khalid chuckled, shaking his head. "I suppose you find my world predictable." "Not predictable, just scripted." Her words struck deeper than he expected. It was a thought he had entertained in the darkest corners of his mind, the feeling that his life had been meticulously arranged before he even had a chance to live it. "And what about you, Miss Morgan?" he countered. "What brings you to Dubai?" Layla rested her arms on the balustrade, gazing at the city below. "Stories. I'm writing a feature on the changing landscape of power here, how tradition and modernity coexist, how the old world and the new clash beneath all this luxury." She turned to him. "Men like you are at the center of that." Khalid studied her carefully. "Then I assume you already have a version of me written in your mind." She smiled. I don't believe in pre-written stories. People surprise you." Their eyes locked, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was something about her, something that made Khalid forget where he was, who he was supposed to be. But reality had a way of creeping back in. "Khalid." The voice was sharp, unmistakable. Faisal al-Rashid, his father's most trusted advisor and Khalid's childhood friend, stood at the entrance to the terrace. Dressed in a pristine white kandura, his posture was rigid, his expression unreadable. Khalid straightened. "Faisal." Faisal's eyes flickered to Layla before returning to Khalid. "Your father is looking for you." A subtle warning. Khalid turned to Layla. "It seems duty calls." Layla smiled, but there was curiosity in her gaze. "I wouldn't want to get you in trouble." He hesitated before replying, his voice quieter. "It might be too late for that." Without another word, Khalid walked past Faisal and back into the grand hall, feeling the weight of expectation settle on his shoulders once more. Behind him, he could still feel Layla's eyes watching, and for the first time in his life, he wished he could ignore his destiny. The next evening, Khalid found himself pacing the dimly lit corridors of his family's estate, his thoughts refusing to settle. He had spent years perfecting the art of compliance, knowing when to speak, when to remain silent, when to obey without question. But since meeting Layla, something had shifted within him, a quiet rebellion igniting beneath the surface. He should have let it go. Instead, he found himself searching for her. The city had come alive in the night, the lights of Dubai gleaming like scattered stars on the dark expanse of the earth. Khalid had made discreet inquiries through contacts outside his father's reach, and now he was here, standing outside an exclusive rooftop lounge in the heart of the city, one that catered to foreign elites, away from the eyes of the Emirati aristocracy. Inside, the atmosphere was far removed from the rigid formalities of his world. Soft jazz played beneath the murmur of conversations, and the scent of jasmine and expensive cigars lingered in the air. Then he saw her. Layla sat at the far end of the lounge, a glass of red wine in hand, engaged in conversation with a well-dressed European businessman. Unlike at the gala, she wasn't wearing an elegant gown, but a simple black dress that accentuated her effortless confidence. She caught sight of Khalid before he could decide what to do next. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, followed by something more dangerous: amusement. The businessman said something, but Layla was already rising to her feet, making her way toward Khalid with an air of quiet authority. "Twice in 2 days?" she mused. People will start thinking you're following me. Khalid tilted his head slightly. Perhaps I am. Layla's lips curved into a smirk. Well, that would be quite the scandal, wouldn't it? Khalid knew she was testing him, pushing to see how far he was willing to go, how much he was willing to risk. He should have walked away. Instead, he said, "Would you like to see something real?" Layla raised an eyebrow. "That depends on your definition of real. Come with me." She hesitated for only a second before placing her glass on the table. "Lead the way." The desert was alive in a way the city never could be. Khalid drove them away from the towering skyline, beyond the artificial lights and manicured streets, until the vast emptiness of the dunes stretched before them like an ocean frozen in time. Layla stepped out of the car, the sand cool beneath her feet, her expression unreadable as she took in the silence, the sheer magnitude of the landscape. "It's beautiful," she admitted. Khalid watched her carefully. "It's home." Layla glanced at him. "Not the city. The city was built on ambition. The desert is where we began." Something flickered in her gaze, a quiet understanding. "And yet, you're trapped in that world." Khalid exhaled slowly. "Every man has his chains, Layla. Some are just made of gold." She studied him for a long moment before shaking her head. You don't strike me as the type to accept a cage." A low chuckle escaped him. "And you don't strike me as the type to avoid trouble." Layla grinned, guilty as charged. The wind stirred, carrying with it the scent of distant spices from a hidden Bedouin camp. For the first time in years, Khalid felt like he could breathe. But reality was never far behind. A sudden vibration from his pocket shattered the moment. He pulled out his phone, his jaw tightening at the name flashing on the screen. Faisal. He hesitated, then silenced the call. Layla noticed. "Someone looking for you?" Khalid's expression darkened. "Someone always is." For a moment, he thought she might press him for answers. Instead, she simply said, "Then I suppose we should make the most of right now." And for the first time in his life, Khalid al-Fayyad chose to ignore his fate. The desert night had a way of making everything feel infinite. The sky stretched endlessly above them, an ocean of stars untouched by the glow of the city. Khalid and Layla sat atop one of the dunes, the sand cool beneath them, the silence between them comfortable. For once, Khalid wasn't thinking about duty, his father's expectations, or the consequences of his actions. He was thinking about her. "Oh, you're different from what I expected," Layla admitted, breaking the silence. Khalid smirked, disappointed. "Not yet." She shot him a teasing glance. "But the night is still young." He chuckled, shaking his head. "And what exactly did you expect?" Layla turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "A man weighed down by his legacy, someone who had already accepted his fate." Khalid exhaled slowly. "I thought I had." Something in the way he said it made Layla pause. There was honesty in his voice, a rawness he wasn't used to showing. "You don't have to live under your father's shadow, you know," she said softly. Khalid let out a humorless chuckle. "You say that like it's a choice." "It is." He turned to her, studying her carefully. "And what about you, Layla? Do you always get to choose the stories you tell?" She hesitated, and for a moment he saw a flicker of something, doubt perhaps. "Not always," she admitted. But when I do, I make sure they matter." Their eyes met, and for a fleeting second, the weight of their worlds faded into the background. Then Khalid's phone buzzed again. He ignored it. Layla arched an eyebrow. "That's the second time you've done that." Khalid exhaled sharply, glancing at the screen. Faisal, he knew what it meant. "Trouble? Maybe we should head back," he said reluctantly. Layla studied him, but didn't argue. "All right." By the time they returned to the city, the carefree night they had stolen was already slipping through Khalid's fingers. As soon as he pulled into the private garage beneath his penthouse, Faisal was waiting. The moment Khalid stepped out of the car, Faisal approached, his usual calm demeanor replaced by something sharper. "You've been ignoring my calls," Faisal said. Khalid sighed. "I needed some air." Faisal's gaze flickered to Layla, who had just stepped out of the car. There was no mistaking the recognition in his eyes. Khalid squared his shoulders. Layla, this is Faisal al-Rashid, a longtime friend. Faisal's expression remained unreadable. Miss Morgan, Layla offered a polite nod. Faisal turned back to Khalid. Your father is looking for you. He's not pleased. Khalid clenched his jaw. When is he ever? Faisal took a step closer, lowering his voice. This is not a joke, Khalid. He knows. The words landed like a blow. Khalid's mind raced. His father knew about Layla, about tonight. His grip tightened at his sides. And what does he plan to do? Faisal hesitated. He's making arrangements. A chill ran down Khalid's spine. He knew exactly what that meant. His father had power, influence. If he wanted Layla gone from Dubai, he had the means to make it happen. Layla, sensing the tension, spoke up. Maybe I should go. Khalid turned to her, his expression hardening. No, Faisal sighed. Khalid, no, Khalid repeated, his voice steel. I'll deal with my father. Faisal studied him for a long moment before exhaling. Then you better do it soon. With one last glance at Layla, Faisal turned and disappeared into the night. Khalid clenched his fists. The illusion of freedom they had tasted in the desert was gone. Reality was closing in, and for the first time, he realized just how dangerous this had become. The Al-Fayyad estate was silent at this hour, but silence in his father's house was never comforting. It was calculated, heavy, expectant. Khalid walked through the grand hall, the flickering glow of lanterns casting elongated shadows across the marble floors. The familiar scent of oud lingered in the air, a reminder of tradition, of lineage, of the weight he carried with every step. His father was waiting for him. Sheikh Omar sat in his usual place, a private lounge lined with dark mahogany and shelves filled with volumes of history and lore. He was dressed in his finest kandura, his bisht draped over his shoulders with the effortless grace of a man who had commanded power his entire life. Faisal stood to the side, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Khalid didn't need to ask how much his father knew. The air was thick with unspoken accusations. Sheikh Omar finally broke the silence. A journalist, Khalid met his father's gaze. Her name is Layla, a foreigner. His father continued as if Khalid hadn't spoken. A woman with no ties, no loyalty to this land, to our family. He exhaled, as if the very thought disgusted him. You disgrace yourself. Khalid forced himself to remain calm. I have done nothing disgraceful. His father scoffed. You have entertained a woman who does not belong in our world. You have risked your name, your honor. My honor is my own. Khalid interrupted, his voice firm. A dangerous silence followed. Faisal stiffened slightly, but Khalid didn't waver. Sheikh Omar leaned forward. Your honor is tied to this family, to the legacy your ancestors built. And you think you can simply ignore that for a fleeting desire? Khalid clenched his jaw. She is not a fleeting desire. His father's eyes darkened. Then you are a fool. Khalid took a slow breath. You cannot control every aspect of my life, father. I have followed your rules for years, but I will not be caged forever. Sheikh Omar's expression remained impassive, but his voice carried the cold steel of finality. You will end this, immediately. Khalid held his father's gaze, refusing to look away. And if I don't? For the first time, a flicker of disappointment crossed his father's face. Then you are no longer my son. The words cut deeper than Khalid expected. Sheikh Omar rose to his feet, his presence towering even without raising his voice. You will do what is right. I will give you the night to think. But in the morning, this ends. Khalid didn't respond. He turned on his heel and walked out, his heart hammering in his chest. Faisal followed him into the hallway. You shouldn't have pushed him, Faisal muttered. Khalid let out a sharp laugh. And what should I have done? Bowed my head like a good son. Faisal's expression was unreadable. He will not let this go, Khalid. You know that. Khalid exhaled heavily. I know. Faisal hesitated before speaking again. Be careful. Khalid paused, glancing at his childhood friend. Are you warning me or threatening me? Faisal didn't answer. He simply turned and walked away. Khalid stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of his father's ultimatum pressed down on him. By morning, everything would change. The city had never felt so suffocating. Khalid drove aimlessly through Dubai's winding streets, the weight of his father's ultimatum pressing down on his chest. The neon glow of luxury boutiques and the towering glass buildings felt artificial, a stark contrast to the raw emotions boiling inside him. He had spent his entire life being the perfect son, the perfect heir. But tonight, he wasn't sure if he could continue playing the role assigned to him. There was only one place he wanted to be. Layla stood on the balcony of her hotel suite, looking out at the glittering city below. She had spent years traveling the world, but Dubai had a way of making even the most seasoned travelers feel small. The sound of a knock pulled her from her thoughts. When she opened the door, Khalid was standing there. His usually composed expression was gone, replaced by something raw, something desperate. Can we talk? He asked, his voice lower than usual. Layla stepped aside, letting him in. I was beginning to think you'd disappeared. Khalid let out a humorless chuckle. That would be the easier option. She studied him carefully. What happened? He hesitated before answering. My father gave me a choice, end this or lose everything. Layla's expression softened. And what do you want to do? Khalid exhaled slowly. I don't know. The honesty in his voice surprised even him. He wasn't used to admitting weakness. Layla reached out, placing a hand on his arm. Khalid, you don't owe me anything. If this is too dangerous. Before she could finish, he closed the distance between them. His lips met hers in a kiss that was both hesitant and desperate, as if he were trying to capture something fleeting before it could slip away. Layla didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, her fingers threading through his dark hair, her heartbeat matching the thunderous rhythm of his own. For a moment, there was no tradition, no duty, no expectations, just them. When they finally pulled apart, Khalid rested his forehead against hers. I don't want to lose you, he admitted. Layla smiled softly. Then don't. But deep down, they both knew it wouldn't be that simple. Morning arrived with a cruel inevitability. Khalid sat in the back seat of his father's black Rolls-Royce, the city passing by in a blur of golden sunlight and steel towers. The conversation from the night before still echoed in his mind. His father's ultimatum, Layla's touch, the way her lips had tasted like defiance and desire. But reality was waiting for him. As they arrived at the Al Fayyad estate, the usual formalities were in place. Servants bowed their heads. The scent of freshly brewed Arabic coffee lingered in the air. Everything was as it had always been. And yet, everything had changed. Khalid entered the grand hall, where his father stood with a dignified posture. Beside him was Sheikh Hassan al-Rahman, an old family ally, and next to him his daughter, Amira. Khalid already knew what this was. Son, Sheikh Omar began, we have made arrangements for your future. The words felt like chains snapping into place. Amira al-Rahman was beautiful in the way a carefully polished diamond was. Flawless, expensive, untouchable. She wore a cream-colored abaya embroidered with delicate gold, her expression poised, unreadable. Khalid had nothing against her, but that wasn't the point. You expect me to marry her, he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. Sheikh Omar exhaled slowly. It is what is best for the family. Khalid's jaw tightened. And what about what is best for me? His father's gaze hardened. You are an Al Fayyad. You are not a child to entertain fantasies. This is your duty. Amira spoke then, her voice calm but firm. If it helps, I am no more thrilled about this than you are. Khalid turned to her, mildly surprised. She offered him a small, almost pitying smile. But we both understand what is at stake. And there it was, the unspoken truth. This wasn't about love, it was about alliances, power, tradition. Khalid swallowed the bitterness rising in his throat. I need time to think. Sheikh Omar's voice was final. You have until tonight. Khalid turned on his heel and walked out, his heart pounding. He needed to see Layla. He needed to tell her before it was too late. The moment Khalid stepped out of the Al Fayyad estate, he knew he was being watched. Faisal's presence was never an accident. He stood near the black SUV parked discreetly by the entrance, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. You're making this worse, Faisal said as Khalid approached. Khalid didn't stop walking. I don't recall asking for your advice. Faisal fell into step beside him. Your father won't let this slide, Khalid. He's giving you a choice, but we both know it's an illusion. Khalid exhaled sharply. So what? I'm supposed to accept this fate without question. Marry a woman I don't love. Live a life dictated by him. Faisal stopped, gripping Khalid's arm. You were never meant to choose. You were meant to lead. Khalid met his gaze, anger simmering beneath the surface. Then maybe I don't want to lead. Faisal's eyes darkened. Then you are a bigger fool than I thought. Khalid pulled his arm free. I need to see her. Faisal let out a humorless chuckle. Of course you do. Khalid didn't wait for his permission. He got into his car and drove. Layla's hotel was discreet, tucked away from the city's lavish skyline, a place where high-profile guests came to disappear. Khalid took the private elevator to her floor, his pulse unsteady. When she opened the door, he saw the worry in her eyes before he even spoke. Khalid! He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. They know! Layla's expression hardened. I figured as much. They've arranged my engagement. The words tasted bitter in his mouth. Layla swallowed, but her voice remained steady. And what are you going to do? Khalid ran a hand through his hair. I don't know yet. Silence stretched between them. Then Layla stepped closer. Are you here to tell me goodbye? Khalid's breath hitched. No. She searched his face. Then why are you here? His answer was simple. Because I can't stay away from you. Layla closed the distance between them, and when she kissed him, it wasn't desperate. It was certain. Khalid knew then that whatever happened next, there was no turning back. Khalid had never felt more alive or more doomed. The scent of Layla's perfume still lingered on his skin as he drove aimlessly through the city, his mind torn between two worlds. One demanded obedience, tradition, and sacrifice. The other offered freedom, but at a cost he wasn't sure he could pay. His phone rang. Khalid let it ring twice before answering. What? You need to come home, now. Something in Faisal's tone made Khalid grip the steering wheel tighter. What happened? A pause. Then, your father knows where she is. The air left Khalid's lungs. He swerved the car onto a side street, cursing under his breath. How? You think you're the only one with contacts? Faisal's voice was laced with frustration. He gave you until tonight. You ran out of time. Khalid's grip on the phone tightened. Tell me he hasn't done anything yet. He hasn't, but he will. Khalid didn't wait for more details. He turned the car around and sped back toward Layla's hotel. Layla was already packing when Khalid burst into her room. I figured this was coming, she said, stuffing her laptop into her bag. We don't have much time, Khalid said, running a hand through his hair. You need to leave tonight. Layla froze, meeting his gaze. And what about you? Khalid's jaw tightened. I can't just disappear. Layla's expression was unreadable. So you're staying. Khalid hated the way it sounded. If I run, he will never stop hunting us. She exhaled sharply. And if you stay, he wins. Khalid stepped closer, cupping her face gently. I just need time to figure this out, to find a way. Layla searched his eyes, and for the first time, he saw fear there. Not for herself, for him. Khalid, you know your father better than anyone. Do you really think he'll let you choose? Khalid clenched his jaw. Then I'll make him listen. Layla touched his face. Adrush, you don't owe him your life. I owe my family something. You owe yourself happiness. Khalid exhaled, resting his forehead against hers. Then let me fix this. Layla studied him for a long moment before nodding. Then you better do it fast. Because they both knew time was running out. The city was no longer safe. Khalid had made the decision the moment he left Layla's hotel. There was no talking his father down, no negotiating. Sheikh Omar would never allow him to choose love over duty, so Khalid had only one option left: escape. Layla's hands were steady as she slid into the passenger seat of Khalid's car. The weight of her bag pressed against her lap, a laptop and her passport, just the essentials. She had lived in enough foreign cities to know how to leave quickly. What's the plan? She asked as Khalid pulled onto the darkened highway. He kept his eyes on the road. We head to the desert. From there, I have a contact who can get us out of the country. Layla glanced in the rearview mirror. And if your father realizes we're gone? Khalid's jaw tightened. He already has. The desert swallowed the city lights behind them. The further they drove, the darker the sky became, the stars stretching endlessly above them. The air smelled of sand and something ancient, something untamed. Khalid had always found peace here, but tonight there was no peace, only urgency. Layla watched him, her expression unreadable. You're risking everything for this. Khalid didn't look at her. I know. Silence settled between them, thick with unspoken words. Then headlights in the distance. Layla tensed. Is that? Yes. Khalid gripped the wheel tighter. He recognized the vehicles immediately. Black SUVs, moving fast, closing in. His father's men. Hold on, he muttered, pressing his foot down on the gas. The tires skidded against the sand as they swerved off the main road, the car bouncing as they hit uneven terrain. The desert stretched infinitely ahead, but Khalid knew these dunes better than anyone. A shot rang out. Layla gasped, ducking instinctively. They're shooting at us. Khalid clenched his teeth. My father doesn't make empty threats. Another shot, this time closer. They needed to move faster. Khalid veered the car toward an old desert path, one barely used except by Bedouins who knew how to disappear. If they could just reach the outpost. Then suddenly, the car jerked violently as something hit the back tire, a spike. They spun out of control, the world tilting as sand and sky blurred together. Then impact, darkness, and silence, pain. It was the first thing Khalid registered as consciousness slowly returned to him. His head throbbed, and the taste of blood lingered in his mouth. The world was tilted, the scent of gasoline and sand thick in the air. The car had crashed. His vision blurred as he forced himself upright. Beside him, Layla groaned, her fingers gripping the dashboard. Are you okay? He asked, voice hoarse. Layla blinked, dazed, but conscious. Yeah, just remind me never to let you drive in a high-speed chase again. Khalid almost laughed, but there was no time. The black SUVs had stopped a few meters away, doors opening, men stepping out. Faisal was the first to approach. Khalid, he said, his voice sharp but not unkind. This has to stop. Khalid forced himself out of the wrecked car, shielding Layla instinctively. It doesn't have to be this way. Faisal exhaled, glancing at Layla. You think this ends with you running? Your father will never allow it. You know that. Khalid's hands curled into fists. I'm done being his puppet. Faisal's gaze softened. Just for a second. Then don't be reckless. Come back. Face him. Maybe there's another way. Khalid's heart pounded. He knew what Faisal was really offering, a way to keep Layla safe, but only if Khalid surrendered. A long silence stretched between them. Then Khalid turned to Layla. She understood before he even spoke. No, she whispered, shaking her head. You don't have to do this. Khalid cupped her face, his touch gentle despite the storm raging inside him. If I don't, he'll never stop hunting us. Tears welled in her eyes. You don't owe him your life, Khalid swallowed hard, but I owe you yours. A final kiss, soft, fleeting, filled with everything they couldn't say. Then Khalid turned back to Faisal. Take me to him. Layla tried to protest, but the men were already pulling her away, forcing her into another car. Khalid watched as she disappeared into the night, his heart shattering with every step. He had made his choice. Now, he would face the consequences. Khalid had been in this room 1,000 times before. The private study of Sheikh Omar Al-Fayyad was a place where decisions were made, alliances forged, and destinies sealed. But tonight, it felt like a prison. His father sat behind the massive oak desk, his expression unreadable. You made a fool of yourself, Sheikh Omar said, his voice cold. And of this family, Khalid stood tall, despite the bruises forming from the crash. I made a choice. Omar's eyes darkened. A foolish one. Khalid exhaled slowly. Then let me be a fool. A long silence stretched between them. Then his father leaned back in his chair. Do you truly believe this woman is worth everything? Khalid didn't hesitate. Yes. Sheikh Omar studied him carefully. Then you will renounce your name, your title, everything. Khalid's stomach twisted, but he had already made his peace. So be it. A flicker of surprise crossed his father's face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. Then you are no longer my son. The words should have hurt. Maybe. Years ago they would have. But now, they only brought Khalid a strange sense of freedom. Sheikh Omar gestured to Faisal, who would get him out of my sight. Faisal hesitated. For the first time, Khalid saw something almost like regret in his friend's expression. But Faisal obeyed. And just like that, Khalid Al-Fayyad, heir to one of the most powerful families in Dubai, ceased to exist. 2 weeks later, the world knew his story. Layla's article had gone viral. Not just about him, but about the hidden power struggles, the chains of tradition, the cost of loving freely in a world that did not allow it. The Al-Fayyad name was under scrutiny, the pressure was mounting, and then the impossible happened. A message from Noura. Come to the marina. Tonight, Khalid hesitated for only a moment before heading there. The docks were quiet when he arrived. A yacht swayed gently under the moonlight, its sleek design unmistakable, and standing on the deck, Layla. Khalid's breath caught. She ran to him before he could process it, her arms wrapping around his neck, her body warm, real, here. You came back, she whispered against his skin. Khalid held her tighter. I never left. Noura stepped forward, a knowing smile on her lips. You always were stubborn, brother. Khalid exhaled sharply, his throat tight. How? She shrugged. Let's just say our father's facing too much public scrutiny to chase you anymore. You're free. Khalid looked at Layla. We're free, she smiled. So, what now? Khalid looked out at the open sea. The world stretched before them, limitless. Now, he said, we write our own destiny. And for the first time in his life, he truly believed it.